Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Martin Daubney. Now, there are reports tonight that farmers could be preparing to block supermarket distribution centres with tractors as the row over the government's inheritance tax raid intensifies. The protest could take place as soon as mid-January. In fact, I heard today from one of the organisers, as soon as January the 10th. Indeed, there are warnings tonight that the protests could increase prices for Brits. Well, the government is understood to have drawn up contingency plans to prevent supermarket shelves from lying empty. Now, farmers were left infuriated after the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, announced that inheritance tax would apply to agricultural assets worth more than £1 million for the first time ever. So as farmers plot a potential blockade of supermarket depots, is this the right course of action, and would the public support potentially food shortages? Well, to discuss this story, I'm delighted now to be joined by Mo Fisher, who is the External Affairs Director at the Countryside Alliance. Mo, what do you make of these reports? I spoke to 3 farmers earlier on today who are involved in this. They're saying no food, there could be serious chaos, a complete shutdown of the food distribution system. We will never stop. Is this the right course of action?
Well, I mean, this is ultimately the government's problem. This is their mess. They've created this. They picked a fight with the countryside. They've spent the entirety building up to the general election, trying to woo them and courting them. And now look where we are. Farmers are furious. I mean, you know that, Martin. As you said, you've been speaking to them. GB News has done a huge amount to connect with farmers building up to this. And it's quite difficult to negotiate or reason with someone that's about to lose absolutely everything. Now, personally, I don't think I agree with some of the comments made on the show earlier. I don't think this is the right course of action. It's really important that the public stay on the side of farmers and make this all about the government. And I think you alluded to earlier, there being an action day on the 25th of January. That's going to be a constituency-wide action day where we're going to see local protests, tractor marches and demonstrations happening right up and down the country. And they're going to be taking place now on Labour's doorstep in these rural seats. We were only talking about it last week. I remember Gwen, who's on the show today, said that all these MPs are toast. Well, you know, it's still very early days, actually. And the More in Common poll that's been discussed, well, that's absolutely brutal for Labour in the countryside. 3/4 of their seats gone, most going to the Tories, a handful to Reform and some to the SNP. It's a really dark time for Labour in the countryside, but they did this to themselves. And I hope that building into the new year, they get in touch with us and the other rural groups and try and work a way out of this mess.
I wonder if part of the issue is that farmers are so keen to keep the public on their side, they're so keen to do the right thing, to play by Queensberry rules, that it's not getting any traction. The farmers I speak to say each time they need to intensify their action. First, it was Wellingtons and hats at Westminster. Then it was tractors at Westminster. Now it's tractors in constituencies. But maybe it's time for something more brutal. And, you know, the message that I've been having today throughout my show 3 hours earlier on, a lot of people seem to think that food shortages, you know, would be a price worth paying to actually make the government listen. Tony Blair's government had popularity in the year 2000 that this government could only dream of. The farmers blockaded then fuel depots, blockaded food. There were shortages on the supermarket. Blair did a U-turn within a week. Surely it's time for history to repeat itself.
Well, look, mate, no doubt about it. If these people are serious about carrying out that form of protest, then they're going to do it, and it is going to have consequences. And I said that's going to be a very bad look for the government. Yeah, farmers will take a hit in the poll in the public opinion polling, but ultimately it's the farmers. It's the government who are going to have to carry this one. I still don't think that the time is now for that. I personally don't believe that. I think that we are actually making a huge imprint. I mean, if you look at that More in Common polling and the breakdown in the rural seats, it's horrendous for Labour. And we know, we are hearing that it is cutting through amongst those rural MPs. Yeah, those rural Labour MPs didn't make much of a noise during the Opposition Day debate, but privately to constituents, they are voicing their concerns. And we knew this was going to happen. Let's not forget, Martin, when you're a new MP, it is actually really hard to put your head above the parapet. The whips come down on you like a ton of bricks, and they do intimidate new MPs. We've all seen it with colleagues in other parties. But the reality is that now, when they're looking at losing their seat and things getting a lot worse, I believe that the pressure will go up. And as I said, the 25th is just a start of constituency-wide targeting. And I hope to see a lot more. But ultimately, I just want Rachel Reeves to accept that she's got this one wrong, review the policy and move on.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us, Superb, and a very happy new year to you. Mo Fisher, the External Affairs Director at the Countryside Allowance. Now back to the studio now. Gawain Towler, former Reform UK spokesman, and Nigel Nelson, GB News' senior political commentator, join me. Gawain, I'm going to start with you this time. I wonder if this waiting 4.5 years, playing by the rules, being polite is going to cut through. The farmers I speak to are saying to me, they need to channel a bit more of their inner gilets jaunes. They need to be a bit more friendly, a bit more revolutionary, get dirty, make people listen.
They have seen what happens when the French farmers get niffed off and they change governments, they change policy in France. And how do they do that? By being somewhat more manifest than the British farmers. We are essentially a decent crowd, and the people in the countryside even more so. They are good people. But you push people. They're the quiet people of England who have not spoken yet, and maybe they're just about to speak. And if you look at them, not just England, and Wales and Scotland as well, and Northern Ireland, people are feeling so frustrated, so annoyed, and they look at their formal leadership. And Mo is right about certain things that he was just saying. And you look at the NFU. The NFU is more a quango of government talking to farmers than a body of farmers talking to government. They have stepped up on this one, to a certain extent, but over the years, they're much more top-down than bottom-up. And what we're seeing is possibly the creation of a new farmers' union and a much more radical farmers' union.
Nigel Nelson, I wonder if that's true, because the farmers I speak to, they say they want to get more radical, but they also say they want to sit down and negotiate. They would love, for example, there to be a midway point where the farmers that they're purporting to target, the rich landowners, the pretend farmers, sure, go after them. But why blunderbuss those who are struggling to make ends meet? The Labour Party, they've taken everybody in the net and they won't sit down and negotiate. That could escalate things to be, well, a bit more French.
Well, you don't normally negotiate budgets for a start, so any more than you do with VAT on private school fees.
You can lose budgets, though.
You can do what, sorry?
You can lose budgets.
Well, you can change. You can actually.
Basically, you can be forced
change
into
by voting them out. But with a majority like this,
what happened to Kemi's budget?
But the point I was going to come on to was that yes, there is room for negotiation. There's room for doubling the amount of inheritance tax to 40%. That's what everybody else pays, and then increasing the threshold for the farms that would be hit by it. But at the moment, you're talking about farms probably over 3 million. You're not talking about 1 million. Most of those farms will be. Well, look, hang on a sec.
Not according even to the government's own figures.
No,
that's rubbish. Even according to the advisor,
the government's own figures are 500 farms would be affected.
Utter baloney.
But how? But why is that baloney?
It's about as real
on the basis that the NFU figures run into tens of thousands. That's if every single farm was affected. Every single farm won't be. It'll be people who will die this coming year, and as a result, 500 farms will be.
The government took advice from BBC Fact Check that couldn't tell the difference between acres and hectares. It's utterly unprepared.
So what you're saying is that 500 figure is wrong?
100%.
What's the right figure?
Personally, I don't know, but it's a hell of a lot more than that, significantly more than that. I don't pretend to be the greatest expert, but I know that 500 figure is wrong, mainly because the government was taking, it seems to have, like so often in DEFRA, they seem to not know what the Treasury is doing. The Treasury doesn't know what DEFRA is doing. They're using hectares instead of acres. They're getting the basic maths wrong. Now, it may be 1,000, it may be 2,000, it may be 480.
Well, they were taking the value of the farms, and so we were looking at farms there.
But you're not looking at farms. Farms are not a tech business. Farms are not a buy per sell business. Farms are something much deeper, much more part of who we are. And the misunderstanding of government,
they're a business like anything else.
No, they're not a business. If you think they're a business like anything else, you just don't understand the countryside. They are not.
Well, I mean, the idea is there's something special about farming.
Well, there is.
Beyond the fact they feed us.
If you imagine England, do you imagine a back street in Blackpool? Do you imagine a back street in Bradford? No. You imagine England, and it's the countryside.
Yeah, but
that is part of who we are. And that doesn't happen by accident.
That doesn't stop
happens
farmers
because of the
being
generations
businesses.
of people working the land.
OK, Nigel.
It doesn't stop farmers being businesses.
They're
And
more
so
than just
at the
businesses.
moment, what they're being given is 20% VAT, probably on over £3 million. That's half any other business would pay if they were passing it on to their family. So the question comes down to, I am concerned about these figures, was if the government are right, there's 500 farms affected, I don't think the farmers have got as much to worry about as they say they have.
But I think we go back to Martin's question, and I think you're wrong on the figures, and the government are wrong on the figures, but OK, fine. But if you go back to what Martin was saying, do they start to step up and become more French about things? I think that's what's going to happen, because
Well, they won't endear themselves to the public if they empty
nor did
supermarket
the
shelves.
nurses, but actually they did. No, I think the public actually see the farmers as part of who they are.
The nurses carried on treating patients.
And the farmers will carry on farming.
When they're on strike. The farmers are talking about stopping food, getting out of warehouses, into supermarkets,
And it works,
which
as I
would
say.
cause shortages to the public.
Gentlemen, just for a bit of clarity, one figure is 500. A higher figure is as many as 70,000 farms.
But
Not per year.
that's if every single farm was included. That figure does not relate
Keir
to...
Starmer, in opposition, said farms are different. They shouldn't be treated as an ordinary business. Just as the Labour Party said, the winter fuel allowance would cause the deaths of 4,000. This is about inconsistency. It's about changing your position once again.
That is a different argument, though.
But that's the argument I'm making. The argument is saying they're just any other business. They are not.
Gentlemen, we have to call time on a magnificent debate there. Thank you very much, Gawain and Nigel.